Welcome back to the Atlanta Construction Podcast. Today, our guest is UNB Offsite Construction Research Center, and we have with us today Brandon Searle. Brandon's the Innovation Director at UNB Offsite Construction Research Center, OCRC for short. Brandon's been there since May 2019, and since that time, at that time, there was 2 staff. Now there's 6 staff and 19 researchers. Brandon is a professional engineer. Brandon, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan. Happy to join you.
For sure. Maybe you could give us just a little bit of a background about yourself, Brandon, and your journey in construction. I know you've been part of the CAN-BIM board and Modular Building Institute and different things, and maybe just take us through a little bit of your personal journey in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. So, as you mentioned, I have an engineering background. So, I grew up around construction. My grandfather was in the trades and construction, same with my dad. So, I grew up with that, and then going through university, I attended University of New Brunswick, doing civil engineering, worked for a couple of contractors, doing road construction mostly, and then worked for the city of Moncton as a student, and went on after graduating to consulting with a company called Opus. So we were actually focused really on infrastructure management. So I had a bit of construction background which allowed me to apply some theoretical stuff with infrastructure management to like the real practical knowledge, hands-on knowledge that I was able to gain at a young age. And then Opus was acquired by WSP, worked there. I think it was close to 5 years in total that I was there. And then UNB had started this offsite construction research center. And that was really kind of started through discussions with OSCO Construction Group, who's one of the university's strategic partners. And over 2 years, discussions led to this research center. And they hired, the way universities work, they hire a research chair, which is typically a professor, for each center to lead the scientific research of it. And then recently they've been moving to hiring an innovation director, which does project management, industry engagement, business development type stuff. So when they announced this center in September 2018, 2 positions quickly opened up. So I joined in May 2019. Since then, just getting more and more involved in construction, mostly in buildings and vertical infrastructure, I guess we'll call it, and had the opportunity to get nominated to the CAN-BIM board of directors. That was winter 2020. So joined that in July 2020. That's been a really good experience. At the time, I think it was the first one in Atlantic, Canada on the CAN-BIM board. So it was great to, get some representation east of Quebec type of thing. And we had a CAN-BIM event in partnership with the university and hoping to bring more back. So yeah, that's been great. And then you mentioned Modular Building Institute, they're mostly American, or they've historically been American focused, but they have a Canadian council, which involves 20 or 30 Canadian construction industry professionals across the country. And I recently joined that council. So
that's great stuff, Brandon. Maybe just take us through, UNB offsite construction and what it looks like on the campus. Obviously, there's several staff there, and you guys have a large area where you're doing this research and development. And you've got 4 themes, I believe, with the areas of research that you're focused on: digital technologies, industry-driven research, constructability, and just the main mission of UNB Offsite Construction, where the goal is to drive forward the design for manufacturing and assembly, and kind of instead of constructing on site, assembling and offsite, and how that the main mission, the main goal of the organization.
Yeah, for sure. So going back to the way it started. So in 2016 or so, Osco Construction Group, which, you know, they're in precast concrete, fabricating steel, GCs, etc. They came to the university, said they wanted to kind of create a center that is for the industry, very much industry driven, to do applied research that helps Atlantic Canada. And so all our focus is really on doing what we call applied research. So that's industry driven research. All our projects we do, we often have graduate students, so that'd be master's or PhD level students, but they're in addition to doing their research, they are working on a project with industry, and sometimes that research applies to the industry project, and sometimes it doesn't, but it gives them some knowledge and hands-on experience. But really, like, going back to our whole mission and vision, it's really about innovation in the industry. And while our name is Offsite Construction, a lot of our focus has been around BIM, VDC, new technologies coming on data collection, and to then improve productivity, quality, and safety. And all of this, all the work we're doing around digital tech implementation and things is really in hopes to enable activities that are traditionally done on site, off site. And there are several reasons for benefits, or several benefits around moving things off site into a manufacturing type environment. Obviously it can't all be done off site. There's just things that we do day to day in the industry that it's best done on site, but all our focus is around that. And when you mentioned our fourth theme, so we kind of have digital technology implementation, we have constructability and testing, and that's around new building materials, structural engineering research, connections, whether it's mechanical, electrical, plumbing connections, or just innovating steel connections. And then lean construction. So obviously lean's big in manufacturing, and it can be applied to the construction industry more. So that's all about productivity improvement, whether it's the on-site productivity or, stuff in the plant. And then the industry driven research is really around doing research that, like, you see McKinsey and Company or BuildForce or these organizations that release, market studies. So our research, when we say industry driven, is really the work that then those organizations would use in their publications. They would reference some of the work. So one thing we're doing is, trying to figure out a way to measure maturity of organization for, implementing digital technologies. And you might have seen CCA came out with a report done by KPMG around maturity levels, and there's a ton of opportunity to implement new technologies in our industry. But really, how do you measure that? And and what can you do to drive companies to invest in innovation and these new technologies? So, in the UK, the government came out 10 years ago and said every government-led project needed to be to BIM 200, LOD 200. And that there were some pros and cons to that approach. When you think about, maturity of an organization, when it comes to whether it's maturity in terms of doing offsite construction or maturity in terms of implementing digital technology, let's say the government comes out and says 10% of your project has to be offsite construction. Well, how do you measure what 10% is, and say that they include that in the procurement model? Then we're doing research that will hopefully allow organizations and companies to kind of baseline where they're at in their maturity and create a roadmap for innovation.
Is that something that you might see in tenders where the government is requiring a 10% is done offsite, whether it be for the carbon footprint or any number of reasons, and some contractors can't bid on that project because they're not set up to do so?
Well, I don't know if we'll see that necessarily. I think it's too difficult to measure that. And honestly, what is offsite? We can say we see all these. I mean, in Halifax especially, you see all these large apartment buildings and office multifamily buildings going up, and A portion of those are offsite. There's fabrication of the structural steel done offsite, and windows and doors and things like that. So what we've seen in I know in New Zealand, Prefab NZ, which is a lobbying type company for prefabricated buildings, they're pushing for the government to implement that. But I don't know if we'll get there. I do think we'll get to a point where BIM will be included in procurement, where it's required to a certain level, more open sharing BIM models, and that I would think should increase productivity and hopefully improve things. But if we learn anything from what our neighbors have done overseas, like when they implemented that, the big players, they had the funds to buy the new technology and work in it and develop standards and so on and so forth. Whereas the smaller companies struggled and they saw it as this black box that they didn't know where to start.
And when the larger corporations, it's an investment that would save money in the long run. It's just a matter of having the And,
exactly.
And for our listeners, just to give some context, say someone who really doesn't know a lot about offsite construction or its implementation in the industry or the role it plays. You talked about Europe and different countries like that and kind of where things are at in Atlantic Canada. So DFMA, design for manufacturing and assembly, is kind of a common term in the automotive industry, aerospace, kind of like, the Henry Ford assembly line type deal. And so like that's really connected to, the goal or the mission of UNB offsite construction. So maybe just kind of take us through how that, the goal is to manufacture as much offsite as possible as opposed to constructing it on site. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And again, like it's a big kind of industry shift that we see potentially happening. And if you're, again, I'll reference like McKinsey or Dodge Analytics, and they saw with Industry 4.0 and all these technologies coming out and the way that things are changing at the design phase. And there's an opportunity for offsite construction, or they mostly use modular as their term in their reports. But DFMA is all around exactly what you said, design for manufacturing and assembly. But, there's a lot more involved in that. And, there's design. So one of our researchers, he has a paper around DFX, and DFX is just a blank for whatever you put in. So there's design for logistics, design for assembly, design for erection, design for manufacturing. And it's important to, take that all into consideration. And one thing that I think the industry is seeing, at least the offsite industry, which is relatively small in the grand scheme of things, if you think of it as only modular or prefab, one thing we're seeing is that we have to bring obviously the owners and developers on board, but the architects and the designers and the folks who just aren't familiar with designing for that type of building or that type of assembly. And that's where there's a lot of education, I think, required there. And that's where DFMA will play a role. And it's a lot more, I would say, upfront costs for savings towards the end, like during the construction phase of the project. Right. And getting, sorry, I was just going to say, and then getting, the trades involved earlier, the GCs and like all the contractors involved throughout the supply chain earlier, so that when you are doing that design, it's not, actually 70% done when it gets to the GC, and then they're adding their piece, and then the mechanical folks need to add their piece, and so on and so forth. You want it all done, in one shot type of thing, and collaborating early on in the project. So
right, and so UNB, this offsite construction center. Obviously, like you mentioned, you're using MBA, you're using your master students for some of the, the R&D stuff that happens in house, and then you're integrated, with the community in New Brunswick with some private partners, some other partners, and so for just a kind of an example, like you're working towards coming up with like a wall system that had maybe mechanical and electrical kind of all integrated within, and
Yeah.
that could be manufactured with a modeling system to all the geometry and measurements and that was needed for this certain project happening somewhere in New Brunswick or anywhere for that matter, and it's manufactured and then taken and craned into place. And that would be sort of would that be sort of an example of a little snapshot that shed light on what an example would be for what you guys are working towards?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I could dive into a few of our projects. That one that you just mentioned is, whether it's modular or panelized, and a lot of this stuff isn't new practice, right? Like the Calgary games in '88, all those homes that they built for the athletes were, modular, right? So, but one kind of clear or obvious thing that we found was that, a lot of the benefits to offsite construction is the shortened schedule. But what we're finding is there's still a bottleneck when you get to site and you have to have the trades come in to connect everything on site. And what some of our industry partners have come to us and said is, what if we could move some of our trades inside the factory? So hypothetically, you have a precast concrete company who is now embedding, the mechanical, plumbing, electrical right into their precast panels. They have access points along it, and to do that, there's a lot of structural research because your tolerances have to be spot on. So if you have your structural connections right, then you'd think, in theory, again, it's all theoretical at this point, but in theory that they would line up perfectly. You could quickly connect all your MEP connections and go from there. And that's a shift going from traditional construction to just construction offsite, which there's a lot of companies in Atlantic Canada that do manufactured homes, let's say, but they're essentially doing construction under a roof, which provides a lot of benefits as well. But now they're starting to move to an assembly line type system, and that's really where you get in. And then in the UK, I'll reference them because they seem to be about 5-10 years ahead in some aspects, is they're talking about companies who are coming up with new colleges that are training people to work anywhere on an assembly line for building any building, really. So you'd be trained to put your drywall up. You'd also be trained to run all the electrical lines type of thing. And it's a whole different process. If you go back to the Ford reference, like it's the same thing with my great uncles. They worked in Windsor, Ontario, and the Ford assembly line. And one day they're helping install the motor. The other days they were putting the hubcaps on the tires type of thing. So you know what I mean? And they were trained across the whole line. So it's a different mindset altogether.
What's the attitude of some of your partners? I mean, like you said, you can never eliminate, a lot of the need for good quality tradespeople on site. I mean, that's always going to be a given. But in some regards, you want to take that down maybe 20 or 30% to some of the, the basic, parts of the construction process that are driving the project, and maybe not as skilled labor. So you still need people working on the assembly lines and constructing it, off site. But do you see any backlash or any? I mean, obviously you guys are cutting edge. This is like, not everyone might have some barriers to seeing the value, or maybe a little bit threatened by it in some ways. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, there's definitely some naysayers, let's say, or people reluctant, and I don't think it's, when I'm saying all this is all, I don't think this is going to happen tomorrow by any means, and I don't think it's going to happen across our whole industry. If you break it down into, say, heavy civil, institutional, commercial, residential, there's going to be some places where it makes sense and others where it doesn't. Most of our partners that are coming to us, they see offsite as a piece of their business future. So, there's one, for example, where they do concrete, brick. They have a developer, and then for their developing company, essentially, they're also have a general contractor who builds, apartments and stuff, and this company's in Atlanta, Canada. Separate from that, they also have a modular manufacturer. So what if they get to a point where, you know, they're developing multifamily homes and part of it is done modular and other parts are done traditionally, because the traditional way is causing a bottleneck in other developments happening, and their modular plant is slow right now. So there's these hybrid kind of business models that are happening.
for
that,
sure.
you know, and I don't think there's like, I don't think it's one or the other by any means. I think there's a spot for both of it. And in terms of this movement with the trades, I think there's always going to be a need for, you know, electricians and plumbers and everything. I just think that this is even happening in some of the manufacturing plants. Sometimes the ones who are, you know, red seal plumbers, they're doing the plumbing, but if they're waiting on modules to get to them, they'll sometimes get involved in some of the carpentry work up front, right? Because that's just it's a natural thing that you do. So I don't think that will change overnight by any means. And we've definitely had some people, you know, not happy with the whole thought of offsite. And there's there has been historically a stigma around it, where it's been, people think mini homes, but now you're looking, there's a building being built there's modules being built in Poland and shipped to New York, and that's going to be like a 40+ story building, right? So and you would never know that it's modular
Right.
by looking at it. So yeah.
But I like the term hybrid, though. I mean, like you said, it's
Yeah.
not like the goal of this sector is to, you know, 100% eliminate, you know, on site. It's just it's another tool, and like you said, there's so much different research that happens within your organization. Like, even like you mentioned, connections. Like, if you can speed up connections, or maybe make some connections possible off-site, and make the assembly a little bit more streamlined on-site, just things like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly what you said. And then, you know, from a digital technology, like, that has been a real focus of ours. Like, we have some augmented reality, virtual reality software and hardware that we're learning, and you know, we're kind of like a test bed for some of our partners, where they're wanting to dabble in it, but they're not sure where it could be used in their business, and they're not wanting to invest, you know, 20-30 grand in the hardware and licenses right away to test it out. So that's another thing we're doing. I wanted to go back for a sec, because you just mentioned about us, like, you know, doing things for Atlanta, Canada in the industry. And one, I think, driver for creating the Offsite Construction Research Center was when our founding partner came to the university. They saw, you know, the industry kind of on the brink of major innovation with Industry 4.0 and everything like that. And they looked at certain places around the world where it was like, you know, in Germany, they're quite advanced in industrialized construction. And as a result, there's a lot of machinery and things that gets manufactured there for precast concrete, right? Or Ireland, I think, had a very niche kind of manufacturing industry there that was targeting, you know, and their customers were international. So one thing that is kind of a driver for us too is to be able to do research to help companies produce new materials, innovative building materials, and also do research on producing new components. And really, it's about moving, you know, making Atlanta, Canada a hub for this type of products.
And when you talk about building materials, does that mean, like, are you guys doing testing on materials and then sort of involved in spec writing and that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, spec writing, not as much at this point, but we have, so our center falls under the civil engineering department. So within that department, there's a structural lab, a geotechnical lab, pavement lab, etc. So we work closely with one of the structural professors for that type of research. There's a ballistics and mechanical testing lab that he's the director of as well. That's, you know, shooting like whatever you want at very high velocities, like up to, I think it was like 9,000 meters per second, which would be research for, for outer space for NASA or whatever, but then there's also research that can be done for hurricane or tornadoes where, you're throwing a 2x4 up against a building wall panel, right? Building envelope, and seeing how it reacts. So we are doing research in that area. We actually just applied for funding to build the building envelope research facility. So it's going to be like a 30-foot by 14-foot panel where we can do impact tests, structural tests, air pressure, leakage tests, etc., on different building products or materials, and really look at going back to integrating the MEP, so integrating the full building envelope and testing that, rather than the way it works now is windows and doors are pre-engineered, and that's why they're able to be mass produced. But imagine being able to mass produce a full wall panel with everything integrated and having those test results. So we're able to do those too, and we're building our capacity in that hopefully in 2022.
So are people able to come by the UNB campus and see some of what happens within the confines of UNB offsite construction there on campus, like whether it's testing or the robotics or anything that happens in your research center?
Yeah, absolutely. We have like most of our, again, going back to like, we've only been a research center for 2 years, and a lot of our research has been digital technology focused. So we haven't had these big, nice, fancy equipment to show off for a tour, but we have like the ballistics and mechanical testing lab that we've leveraged for some of our research, do tours there, do tours in their structural lab, showcase some of the technology we have, whether it's the HoloLens or we have a very large smart board with different software where we can pull in models and things like that. But yeah, we're welcome to having people come for a tour. And the other thing is, I guess I should mention, a lot of people aren't familiar with doing R&D and some of the grant funding that's available. So that's one thing we do as well, is we are recognized as one of the specialty research groups in Canada. There's 4 under the the NRC IRAP construction sector. So that's National Research Council's Industrial Research Assistance Program. And as a result, they budget they have some funding to bring industry companies under 500 employees to us to do research for them at a small project at no cost to the industry. And then beyond that, we have grant funding that we can help companies apply for. And that's like, at a minimum, the grant funder will cover 50%, sometimes up to 80% of any research project. So if there's organizations looking to just get into BIM or develop standards in BIM, like that's another thing that I wanted to just kind of plug in there for doing research with academia. Yeah.
Also, Brandon, we talked a little bit about maybe the conflict of how maybe some aren't as forward thinking as others, and you mentioned UK being 10 years ahead, and just the offsite construction, maybe some hesitation toward it from certain people in the construction industry, and that's important. But talk about some of the advantages. I mean, time saving, quality control is definitely increased. I mean, safety, sustainability, things like that. I mean, there's logistics and shipping. I think the list goes on. But maybe just talk about some of the obvious and maybe not so obvious advantages of having that hybrid model of some more offsite construction happening.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think there's a ton of benefits, but they're not always easily quantified. And I also think there's a misconception that it's cheaper. I don't necessarily think it's always cheaper. And I would say that, let's say your company was going to dive in and do a hotel all modular. I'd say the first 3 are going to be a learning experience, right? Because it's just a different way of managing a project. But in terms of benefits, like you're seeing, like the Marriott, for example, they presented at Modular Building Institute's World of Modular conference, and I think they referenced something like having a hotel done that was traditionally going to take 2 years. They had that done in 15 months. So you think you can now get, I mean, not in the last year and a half, but typically you have guests in hotels 9 months earlier, and think about all the extra revenue. So if you in the commercial space where their revenues dependent on having those buildings up quicker, that's where you can see a lot of benefits.
Well, I can just hear some owners of hotels listen right now that are going to be giving you a call here. So
Yeah,
where
or
did
apartment buildings.
this hotel, this specific hotel that are you talking about a specific hotel in Atlantic Canada or elsewhere?
No, this one was in the U.S. This
Right.
was in the U.S. So they had one of their, I can't recall her name right now, but it was one of the executives from Marriott talk about their strategy for how they're going to build hotels. And, they have, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star hotels, different lines of hotels, and their strategy for using modular. And it is really, I think, depending on the geography, how close you are to a manufacturer, the manufacturer's capabilities, etc. Other benefits, you mentioned like quality of materials. I mean, anyone, there's an apartment building going up down the road for me, and I saw them in February pouring the concrete for the first floor walls and everything, and I was thinking, like, it's snowing, it's wet, it's unsafe for the workers. You're susceptible to the environment when you're out there. So it just seems obvious. How you quantify that, we'll take some research and comparing a building that is maybe built off-site versus on-site. And then the safety side, one thing that came up to me, which I didn't think about a ton, was, so obviously there's the physical health benefits to likely working in a manufacturing type environment, but the other thing is a mental health benefit. So at the beginning, we were talking about how I kind of, my background in construction, and I referenced my grandfather who worked in road building for a long time, and he would leave at 5 a.m. on a Monday and come back at 7 p.m. on a Friday. But you think, so, we don't quantify mental health or physical health that well all the time, but you think if you're in a manufacturing plant where you have shift work, you have regular work, how that impacts the rest of your life. There's some benefits that aren't yet quantified, but might be something worth thinking about when we go. Sure. When we think about the benefits of offsite.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of other spin-offs too. I mean, even if you're a CM or a GC or PM looking after a project, and there's the more offsite construction happening. I mean, you have anywhere from 5 to 10 material deliveries happening in a week or even in a day. I mean, everything's coming in one day or 1 week, and a lot less on the logistical side for handling that kind of complexity. So.
Yeah, and you think too, to material waste. Like, I mean, if you've been on a large job site, you'll know, like, some stuff goes missing. It gets ruined sitting where it is. Someone backs into it, whatever, right? And causes delays and waste. And so, yeah, there's definitely some benefits there. Just touching on the GCCM thing, I was on a call a few weeks ago, and we were talking about, so obviously there's this rapid housing initiative coming out from the feds, and I think in order to meet the demand that we're going to see, well, there's going to be a lot of funding, I imagine, which is good for our industry. But in order to meet that demand for housing, it's going to be a mixed approach of traditional construction, maybe a hybrid, and maybe a modular, like 100% modular. And what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of uncertainty around, payment structures and bonding and everything when it comes to hiring a manufacturer for CMs and GCs. I do think, like, for your listeners, that'll be something interesting for them, is just better understanding how those projects will work from a financial perspective, because, there's a risk to the GC of overpaying, a 50% down payment essentially for the modules, because a manufacturer could go under, for example. But at the same time, that manufacturer is carrying a lot of burden because they have all the material costs and labor and everything else. So I think that'll be an area that we hear more about as the offsite construction industry grows, is the finance aspects, and also obviously insurance is a big piece, right?
And you mentioned this, this hotel in the States and, fully modular. Just maybe for our listeners, like, so what's that? How much? What percentage of that structure, that building, was built offsite?
So again, it was a conference presentation into a panel discussion. So I'm going off of that. But my understanding is like the foundation and the earthwork and everything was obviously done on site, and then they trucked in all the modules. And what I've seen, like there's another hotel built in Iqaluit. I think Stack Modular did it. You might have heard about that one. So they built the modules, and Nunavut China shipped them through the Panama Canal like 60 plus days. This is Bird and Stack Modular up to Iqaluit, and had to barge them in and everything else. And what they do there, again, the earthwork is all done on site, and then a lot of these mods coming in, they're 100% finished. So from what I've seen anyways, the center point is the hallway of a hotel, and then you have 2 rooms on either side. TVs are all on the wall, beds are made, toilets are in, everything's done before it even gets on the ship to go to Iqaluit. And in that case, my understanding is everything was done off site, and that was unique in a sense because skilled labor, there's less of it in northern Canada, and materials, there's less of it everywhere right now, but in northern Canada they have less material, right? So and then the logistical constraints of just
the geographic
delivering. Yeah.
So do you see anything like that happening in New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada in the near future, just for kind of perspective? Like, do you think
in terms of hotels?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. So Florenceville, Bristol is about small community. It's where McCain, McCain French fries, it's where their headquarters are. But they're about an hour and a half from Fredericton. They actually did a fully modular hotel just this past year. So the GC is based out of Sussex, I guess, as is the manufacturer. And it's a convention center and hotel. I think it's 4 floors. So the convention center was built traditionally. The first floor and earthwork and everything was done traditionally. And then they shipped the second, third, and fourth floor from Sussex up Route 2 or Route 1, Route 2 to Florenceville. And we actually did a case study. We had 2 students, one student go on site and kind of monitor productivity of lifting the mods on site and see like into place and connecting them and everything. And then the other one did like a digital tech case study, like kind of the BIM aspects of the project. But I mean, it's something we have to communicate better in our research center, get it out there, I think, because it's happening right here. And that Bird did an expansion of the Quality Inn Hotel on Bishop Drive in Fredericton. That would have been maybe a handful of years ago, and the expansion was all done modular as well. And there were a lot of lessons learned there. I think there was some additional material waste because the companies had never hadn't done that type of work before, so they had extra bracing and supports for the shipping and things like that. And then there might have been some stairwell hurdles to overcome, I think. But yeah, it's happening here, and that Florenceville project was really unique.
I think I recall. I think we had Cresco on our podcast maybe a couple of months ago. Obviously, a major home builder here in the parks of West Bedford and stuff, and they were talking about some modular stuff from New Brunswick and some different avenues they were maybe considering taking for some of their construction practices. And we've had other large guests and industry leaders like Pomerleau and Marco, and talking a lot about new technologies and just how everything is kind of at a pivot point right now for things moving forward, where everything that those people and those companies have talked about is kind of pointing in the direction of what UNB offsite construction research center is designed to do, and it's kind of like that vehicle to push those initiatives forward, because we are really at a turning point in the construction
Yeah, for
industry
sure.
now.
Yeah, other thing I want to mention. I know we might be getting close to time, but the other thing I want to mention too is, like, even though we are, New Brunswick based, we have several partners in like industry partners in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. Met with someone from Newfoundland yesterday, a few in Ontario, Edmonton, BC. But we're actually trying to create this kind of national research group with several universities and colleges, because we have a lot of things we can do and do well, but there's a lot of things that we're not experts in, and so we want to be able to leverage our colleagues at other universities and colleges in this. And one thing I just wanted to bring up is, and knowing that you're in Halifax, is we have we've been in touch quite a bit with Dalhousie, specifically their architecture group and their industrial engineering group. We have construction management and offsite construction research, and they have industrial engineering and architecture, and it complements. We complement each other very well. So, this can really be at minimum Atlantic Canadian initiative, but we want to be the hub for the R&D in Canada, and pull in all the appropriate researchers and individuals across the country as our initiative grows with the research center. So I hope your listeners, when they hear it, they think of it as, it's not a New Brunswick thing. It's not a solely Atlantic Canadian thing, although it is happening here. It's really to drive the whole industry across the country. So
For sure. And you mentioned, I think, I don't know if all your partners are private, but and maybe maybe you can disclose or not disclose some of your partners. But what avenue are your partners coming from? Are these contractors in the industry? Are they other university campuses?
yeah, so it's a mix. So we actually have a couple public sector partners. So I can mention, like, City of Edmonton's one, for example, helping them with a permitting type project. And then we've had discussions with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure locally here in New Brunswick. We have, I think it hovers, but we're around 15 projects with individual industry partners right now. They range from modular manufacturers to general contractors, CMs, and then we also have partner in Nunavut who's building affordable homes, startup company. They've done a pilot project, and now we're doing a supply chain study, logistics study, building a simulation of shipping modules from central Canada up north, and also their DFMA, lifting points, all that stuff, and a materials study for them, because they're facing minus 65 degrees up at their coldest. So there's not many materials that have been subject to that type of temperature. So
Right.
we're doing some work in that. So again, it's pretty much everyone in the supply chain that you can think of, we've worked with. And one unique one, the company actually out west, they're kind of what we call an integrator. So they're not quite like a GCCM, but they get involved with the owner developer right off the get-go, and they're very hands-on with pulling the designers, modular manufacturers, and GCs and trades all together, and that's kind of a unique business model that we're likely going to see more of as offsite construction grows. These integrators that are really about pulling organizations together, and almost consultants, and representing the owner developer, and at times doing some of the project management or GCCM type work too.
It's funny you mentioned the weather up in Iqaluit. I think it was, and it's like Atlantic Canada is anything but a landlocked area. So the moisture in the air, and the winds, and the changes in weather conditions, it's got to be one of the worst places for the weather variables to build a structure that's, like, if you compare it to a human being, you want to put a jacket on that's going to last all year through all the different seasons for your building envelope, and it's
Well, it's funny. So one of my colleagues, he's a researcher in concrete materials, and he's known internationally as one of the kind of leaders in this. And he has different test sites, and one being, in the Bay of Fundy, where he has buried concrete. I forget the exact name, but anyways, it's on the Atlantic Ocean, and he has buried concrete cylinders, and it faces high and low tide twice, like double the amount of time. So he can, do testing, durability testing over years. And it's funny because he was involved in this project with the company up in Nunavut, and what we face in Atlantic Canada might actually be, in a sense, more severe, because we go from, in January, we'll have like a random 12-degree day, and then we're back down to -20, -30 the following week. And so how that impacts the materials is quite interesting. And so we're looking at doing more research in that area. And I should also mention our other research centers. We have a wood science and technology research center that we collaborate with, or like a sister center, except they've been around since '86. We also have a additive manufacturing center, like 3D printing metals, mostly for aerospace and shipbuilding. But yeah, that's the other thing. As UNB grows with these more centers and industry partnerships, we're able to collaborate and work across different sectors, which is pretty neat too.
Yeah, well, so just before we wrap up, Brandon, do you want to mention anything about upcoming conferences in 2022 next year? I think you mentioned a couple notes of student competition or webinars, or even opportunities for people to connect with you guys, and some funding that might be available for them.
Yeah, for sure. So first thing I wanted to mention is, I guess, thank some of my colleagues. So one of my colleagues, Alex Kasky, and our marketing communications person, Morgan Day, they helped organize the first Canadian offsite student poster competition this year. And so due to COVID and things, obviously it couldn't be done in person, but we had a competition where students from across Canada would submit a poster of an offsite construction project and a one-page paper on their project, and focused in on logistical aspects, geographies, connections, and so on. So we just announced the winners there, or notified the winners in the last week. We had 19 teams participate, 54 students from Ontario, BC, Alberta, Quebec, and New Brunswick. And they're going to be presenting at the end of August we've offered for the top 3 to present on their posters. So that might be something, and it's free to everyone. It might be something interesting for the industry to attend. We have our webinar series that ran May 5th, and it goes until August 18th. All those webinars will be posted in the fall online. So just opportunity to learn and share. And they range from digital technology focused to very specific on modular construction. And then, in 2022, we're in early talks of a specialty conference focused on like reality capture technologies and augmented reality and virtual reality. So that would be right in here in New Brunswick. And then partnering with CanBIM, it'll likely be virtual in November. But there's a prefab, offsite, and modular virtual industry summit, it'd be called. That's worth checking out. If it is virtual, I believe it'll be free too, so to members and non-members. And then lastly, just or I guess I should mention this too, we're collaborating with the University of Wolverhampton in the UK, and we're formalizing a partnership. And one thing we did was host a roundtable discussion with companies, some of our industry partners here and industry partners that they have in the UK. And we're looking to bring a cohort to the UK next year and host them here for an opportunity to exchange knowledge exchange and maybe business opportunities, etc. And then just for the funding opportunities, I mean, if anyone's interested in learning more about that stuff, they can reach out to me. But just quickly, there's it's NSERC, it's an acronym, NSERC Alliance Grants. There's MyTax for internships. If you want students doing internships, MyTax Accelerate. NRC IRAP for companies under 500 employees. They have a lot of funding available. And then for organizations in New Brunswick anyways, New Brunswick Innovation Foundation has been a strong supporter of us, and they're great to leverage as well. So yeah, and then ACOA has their funding that, you know, can help with digital technology implementation and
For sure.
whatnot. So yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Brandon, for doing this. It's been great to talk with you and give our listeners and people in the industry and outside the industry just to shed some light on things that are happening at the Offsite Construction Research Center at UNB and all the cutting edge stuff that's happening there. It's definitely something that's in line with the way the industry's headed, and it's very interesting and it's very neat to see all the different things that are happening there. So thanks for your time in doing this, and it's been great. It's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. And congratulations on getting the podcast started, and it's been very successful. I can't wait to watch and hear more of how this grows. So thank you very much. I appreciate the invite.
Cheers. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Atlanta Construction Podcast. Be sure to follow us on any podcast platform you use. You can also find us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Atlanta Construction Podcast. Be sure to send us a comment or a review. We'd love to engage with you.